Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
And this is a long one about a lake princess. The myths and legends surrounding Lake Ronkonkoma would be easy to dismiss as silly superstition were it not for the eerie reality. For many decades, someone drowned in Lake Ronkonkoma almost every year. Lake Ronkonkoma is Long Island's biggest and deepest lake. For some time, Indians thought the lake was bottomless because people who had drowned there would often just disappear, their bodies never recovered. However, even though this myth persists, the lake is certainly not bottomless. It measures about 70 feet at its deepest point. The most prevalent legend is about Princess Ronkonkoma, an Indian princess who died at the lake in the mid-1600s. One version of the story is that she was walking across the ice one winter when she met and fell in love with an English woodcutter named Hugh Birdsall, who lived across the lake. However, her father, chief of the Psychiatric tribe, forbade their relationship. So every day for 7 years, she would write letters on pieces of bark, row to the middle of the lake, and float the letters across the lake to Hugh. Then, after all those years of being kept apart from her love, she rowed to the middle of the lake and stabbed herself to death. There are variations on this particular story, such as that the princess drowned herself after learning about her lover's death, and that her body washed up in Connecticut, which ties into the idea that the lake is bottomless, and that there are underground channels to other lakes. While there's no proof the princess ever existed, Hugh Birdsall was a real person who eventually moved back to England and got married there. In any case, the story goes that she claims a boy's life every year either to avenge her lover's death, or to try to find herself a soulmate in death. And the statistics back up this curse. Of all the recorded drownings on this lake, the vast majority have been young males. Dr. David S. Igneri was the head lifeguard at Lake Ronkonkoma for 32 summers, and says there were at least 30 deaths during that time, all males. On the program Weird US, which aired on the History Channel in 2005, Igneri explains that one of the biggest challenges was that visibility in the lake is non-existent after about the first 10 feet. If anyone submerges lower than that, no one will be able to rescue the person because the lake becomes enveloped in total blackness. In 1965, Igneri had a recurring nightmare about trying to complete a rescue. He dove deep into the lake and panicked because he lost his orientation. When he got to the surface, he heard fireworks. Although Igneri was not previously interested in the paranormal, he believed this dream was a warning that someone was going to drown on the 4th of July. He warned his staff of 11 lifeguards, and sure enough, late that afternoon, an epileptic 15-year-old boy had a seizure and went down in the water. The lifeguards dove for 45 minutes and did everything they could, but could not find the boy. As Igneri swam back to the surface after his last dive, fireworks went off. The Long Island paranormal investigators take a particular interest in Lake Ronkonkoma as well, partly because their group is based in Ronkonkoma. They've been investigating urban legends, homes and businesses for signs of paranormal activity for 7 years, using a host of instruments that include Geiger counters, thermometers, cameras, motion sensors, wind meters, voltage meters, and ion counters. Their ongoing investigations at Lake Ronkonkoma have been inconclusive. We use electromagnetic field meters because current theories indicate that a spirit manifesting will either give off an electrical field higher than what is the normal reading, or that a spirit may use the current electrical field in order to manifest itself, which would alter the reading, says the group's co-founder, Robert Levine. While at the lake, we have observed higher EMF fields than what we would have expected to encounter. However, we remain unsure if this was caused by buried or nearby electrical power lines, nearby homes or businesses, or something else. Levine isn't convinced that there's a curse here, despite the drownings. You must remember that the lake is larger and deeper than many people realize. That combined with alcohol can spell out a disaster waiting to happen for some people. Another person who agrees with Robert is author Michael R. Ebert, who must be the foremost authority on the legends of Lake Ronkonkoma. He published the spiral-bound book, The Curse of Lake Ronkonkoma, in 2002, and it is available at the Sachem, Connetquot and Smithtown libraries. The first time he remembers hearing about the lake's curse was when he attended Ronkonkoma Junior High School in the early 1990s and one of his classmates drowned in the lake. If I remember correctly, he and some friends were supposedly drinking beer on a rowboat and were horsing around when he fell in and was unable to swim to shore due to his bulky winter clothes. After Ebert's college graduation, he searched for more information about the lake's legends in local history books, but found little, which convinced him to write his own book. He spent about 6 months visiting libraries and the Lake Ronkonkoma Historical Society to research articles, maps and geographical studies dating back to the early 1900s. In addition to the stories about Princess Ronkonkoma and the bottomless lake, Ebert also found several other mysteries, such as the way the lake rises and falls with no relation to local rainfall. The Indians believed it to be the work of Manitos, the great spirit of the lake, he says. One study showed that over 7 years in the early 1900s, the rainfall on Long Island was below the usual average by about 52 inches, yet the lake rose 7 feet. Then there were the rumors of healing properties of the lake, supposedly started by a Brooklyn businessman who wanted to capitalize on the lake's appeal as a local tourist attraction in the 1900s. The guy even reportedly sold lake juice in small vials, and I found an old ad promoting the lake as a health resort that cured diseases, says Ebert. So whether you believe the lake will heal what ails you, or that a vengeful princess spirit is out there waiting to drown you, there's no denying that Lake Ronkonkoma is one of Long Island's most whispered about points of interest. I live in Rochestor, Bro. Been to the subway and Terrace Towers a few years back. The subway was pretty cool. There's tons of graffiti, but I wouldn't go alone because there's a good number of homeless people who live down there who aren't too keen on visitors. Never had any of them get violent, but I wouldn't rule it out. There's some crazy motherfuckers out there. You can also come out on a ledge overlooking High Falls, which is a pretty sick view. Terrace Towers was also pretty cool. We got in through a broken window on the back side, although from what I hear they're all boarded up now. I'm sure with enough effort you could break through one of them. The inside of that place looks like the set of a horror movie. It's also pretty maze-like inside. Surprisingly easy to get lost if you don't know what you're doing. I remember stopping to smoke a bowl on the 14th floor and looking down an open elevator shaft. We ended up getting up to the roof through a ladder at the top of a stairwell. There's a ledge you have to walk around at the top with no railing, so if you're not careful you could fall right off the building, which is a 22-story drop. The view from the roof is amazing though, you can see the whole city. There's also a basement, but we didn't explore it at all when we went. I've also heard there's an entrance to some underground tunnels near the highway ramp from 590 to 104. Not sure where exactly, but I've heard it's in that area and they're pretty deep underground. Could be bullshit, but I swear I read about it on some urban explorer dude's blog a couple years ago. There also used to be an abandoned mansion in Webster near the YMCA called Kids Castle, but it got torn down years ago so they could build some retirement community there.
My sister took me on a vacation as a graduation present. The weekend after I graduated we got on a plane to New York, touched down in LaGuardia, or however the fuck you spell it, and took a cab down to our hotel in Little China. We met up with her friend after a day or two staying there a few miles from our hotel at the Met. Granted, we had been walking all day and were a long ways away from our hotel with heavy bags and shit, so when my sister's friend offered to get us home on the subway we jumped at it. This friend lived in the area and took the subway all the time, so we were really dependent on her to get us home. Living in Florida, we had taken the metro, which is a straightforward ride. It's literally just one train going in one direction, but never a subway. Shit was confusing. Thank God for that friend. At any rate, we're walking towards the subway entrance, when I start to get a little lost in my surroundings, trying to make sure the area is safe and whatnot and safeguard my little sis. I guess at this point she and her friend had walked a little further than me, because at that point a homeless stumbles out of nowhere, wanders out into the middle of the crowded sidewalk, sits down in front of a newspaper stand or something and screams out at the top of his lungs, "You gotta help me." I look down at him to see that there's this huge open wood with black, necrotic skin all around it. The guy is clearly in pain and is just shouting at people at this point to please help him. Naturally, being the sheltered little itch that I am, I nope out of there, catch up to the girls as fast I can, and follow my sis's friend every instruction to get on a subway and get the fuck back to our hotel as soon as possible.
Long Island, New York. Mount Misery, Sweet Hollow Road. One legend has it there was a hospital here that burnt down sometime during the 1700s or 1800s, with some patients and staff still trapped inside, only to be rebuilt on the same site to tragically burn down again. Another speaks of a deranged nurse who set the blaze and roams the woods with or without a number of faceless children. Some claim to have seen burning spirits fleeing from the grounds, accompanied by screams. Then there's the legend of the mass self-end, in which several teenagers hung themselves beneath the Northern State Parkway overpass. Visitors who honk their car's horn or flash their headlights 3 times can see their lifeless bodies. It goes. A shadow figure and glowing ghost woman known as the Lady in White, believed by some to be a depressed patient who set the hospital afire, and in doing so, killed herself, can also reportedly occasionally be seen. Some profess her to be Mary, killed by a car or murdered on the road, who haunts a nearby graveyard. Then there's the mysterious gypsy woman dressed in red, who appears out of thin air. There's also the tale of the phantom police officer who is missing the back of his skull. Kings Park Psychiatric Center, Kings Park. Established in 1885 on more than 800 acres of land, Kings Park Psychiatric is a mini-city of restless, anguished souls. Once home to more than 9,000 patients housed in more than 150 buildings, the complex became a self-sufficient farm community. It had a library, firehouse, morgue and cemetery. Most of the compound has fallen into disrepair, but the screams, moans, banging and clanging continues, eternal reminders of the pain suffered amid its walls. Electric shock therapy, insulin shock therapy and prefrontal lobotomies were performed regularly at Kings Park Psychiatric. There is an extensive network of underground tunnels throughout the grounds connecting the buildings, the sites of countless inhuman atrocities of torture and abuse.
This happened when I was about 10 years old. I'm 21 now and nothing similar has ever happened again. The pic related isn't of my attic door, but it looks very similar to the one in the story. It didn't have any stairs or anything like that attached to it. Basically you would have to open the attic door and prop a ladder up to get up there. During the 6 or 7 years we lived in the house, none of my family ever went up there. It's 2005 and my family is selling our family home in Long Island, New York. Last day we are there. All the furniture is gone, clothes gone, etc. My dad had already left the day before and he took our dogs and the cat since they were gonna drive. My mom, sister and I were waiting a few days to leave since we were gonna fly. Hanging with my sister watching her play The Sims on her laptop in her bedroom. She gets up and goes to the bathroom, so I get the bright idea to scare her when she gets back. I hide in my sister's closet and plan on jumping out and scaring her when she gets back. For the strangest reason, my mind gets absolutely fixed on the attic ceiling door in my sister's closet. I cannot stop staring at this attic door. After probably a minute of me staring, the attic door opens. I watch it completely hinge upwards and open. In the attic I can't see a single thing. It's darker than black, the absolute darkest black I've ever seen. After a few seconds the door slams closed. I bolt out of there. I've never had another experience. I can't say the same for the rest of my family though. My sister lived in that room and she's had experiences her whole life. One time she walks into her room. What she describes as almost a Victorian clothed-looking woman brushing her hair looking at herself in my sister's mirror. Vanishes after she sees my sister looking at her. Another time she said she saw a little boy running through our house that definitely wasn't a neighbor or me. My mom never believed her until we were moving out of the house. When my sister and my mom were packing in my sister's house, my sister stands up to grab something. Something shoves my sister into her bed. We understood a few years later that the spirits were pretty pissed we were moving out. Only one family had lived in the house before us, and they only stayed 1 year. So like I said, we lived on Long Island, New York, about 1 hour away from the Amityville horror house actually, and so naturally we had your typical New Yorker real estate agent sell our house. This is your typical, take no bullshit, guy, and he'd been in the business for years. The real estate agent is setting up our house for an open house. No member of our family was at the house at the time. Right as the real estate agent goes to open the door and says, "Welcome to the open house," there's a huge crash in the kitchen. Turns out the curtain on our kitchen window is completely ripped off the window and on the ground. Later on he said when he was alone in the house he kept having the television randomly turn on. He ended up taking the batteries out of the remote. When my mom talked to him later in the day he said, "This house is haunted." Keep in mind, like I said, this guy's career is dealing with houses. Something like that doesn't get said very often. I don't know what other experiences he had. My mom didn't ask after the first few stories. Like I said, I've never had experiences after that, but my sister is like a lightning rod for the other side.
I got one. A pretty famous road, supposed to be haunted, called Sweet Hollow Road out in New York. Anyway, here's the story. Me and friends have gone up and down this road tons of times. We decided to actually walk around in the woods near midnight. Walking around, my friend has a video camera and recording. Pretty creepy, almost pitch black, without our video camera's light. Start hearing shit, so we get the fuck out. Go home, plug the camera in and start watching. Hear my friends talking about stuff. The camera person is alone and nobody is near him other than my other friend who's on the video talking back at him. Suddenly hear this other voice on video, and we all look at each other and go WTF? We increase the sound and we can make out some sort of creepy-ass voice saying beware. Other story is this. Friends decide to go to the cemetery on Sweet Hollow Road late at night. I pussy out and decide to drop them off, and I go park at a parking lot in town. I get these bad chills and start praying. I rarely ever fucking pray, and I keep getting chills every time I finish a prayer. Eventually my friends come back and I tell them to walk into my house backwards, old superstition to stop spirits from following you home. We get inside and they start showing my pictures of the cemetery. One picture stands out. Single tombstone with a shadowy shape around it, like something is either sitting/standing on top of it with 2 yellow eyes. I nearly shit bricks. No wonder I had those fucking chills, something was there.
An obvious urban legend here is the Amityville horror house. The legend is that the house became very haunted after a guy killed his entire family there in the 70s. The next residents, the Lutz family, claimed it to be haunted, and had a bunch of questionable experiences with the paranormal and also called in experts to investigate the house. Ultimately they moved out and no one believed them, and even to this day I find that most people in the area believe the Amityville horror to be fake. This is especially because all the homeowners since the Lutz family left haven't said anything about the house being haunted. The house was also remodeled a while ago, likely to confuse tourists, so they stopped showing up, and the interest in the house has faded over time. I've never been because I don't really believe in it, but it's still an interesting history. My final story for now is of the alien crash in South Haven County Park. The legend is that in the 90s during the early winter a large burning object fell from the sky and crash landed in the park. The cops and fire department showed up rather quickly, but were dismissed by the military that arrived shortly after. The military had the entire area on lockdown by diverting all traffic away from the nearby roads and also put out the fires themselves. It is also believed that the feds were seen taking metal wreckage from the woods and loading it onto covered trucks. They kept the park closed and supervised for a few days before leaving and reopening it to the public. I've been once to look for the site and remember pulling up to a trail parking lot that was gated off with a sign and cameras that said it was federal property and to keep out, so I turned back. Weirdly enough though, when I looked on Google Street View I cannot find where that gate was, but I swear it was at that park, so maybe there are still aliens in the woods.
My dad is a police officer and he works the night shifts. He's seen and been through a lot of shit. Tonight he's an auxiliary, took place a few years ago. Basically a cop volunteer. He told me this a while ago when he came back. His job is usually just to lock down the parks/beaches at night. This actually took place on a famous local beach on Long Island called West Meadow Beach. If you live on a Long Island, you would know it. This was around 12 am at the beach. Be my dad roughly 4 to 5 years ago. I have a friend, let's call him Greg. Greg and I go to parks/beaches. We pull up together at a beach called West Meadow Beach. Inside the gates. He and I have our windows rolled down. Greg and I made small talk. Look through the rear view mirror and see something like pic related. The gnome. Small, maybe the size of a radiator in a home, like 2 feet. Little hunched over, kinda making some sort of dance walk. It dragged its leg as it ran hunched over. Turn to Greg. Hey, did you see that?
Yes.
Oh fuck. JPG. Think it may be a kid. Sadly, it's my job to look over things like this. Turn on the spotlight and search. Get out of the car with a flashlight with Greg and proceed to look around. Nothing. PNG. Look around the tree line. Absolutely quiet and nothing found. We get out of there. Greg and I decide to brush it off as a geese since it's season ECT. The next day, a Friday actually. Around 12 am. Park in the same spot we've always parked at. Layout of beach. There's a road that no one goes on, it's really dark ECT. On it there's a abandoned house. About a stone throw away, pardon the pun. Suddenly a rock hits my windshield. Brush it off. Another one hits my windshield. Fuck me. GIF. Then another hits Greg's windshield. Scared shitless, but brush it off as thinking kids in an abandoned house are messing with us. We get out, turning on every light we had. Search everywhere on the beach. Not a soul. Fucking book it after locking the gates. So he calls it a gnome. My dad being the rookie, he decides not to tell anyone in fear of being made fun of in the police department. It fucking turns out the other officers who have visited the beach also had odd experiences, and some even claim to have seen this gnome. It got so bad in the police department that the volunteer officers would bring shotguns if they were going to that beach. Even the head chief of the department sent a letter to all officers saying that they do not have authority to shoot the gnome or little people because there is no lethal threat. They don't want to hurt animals/kids.
On the farthest point of Long Island, the last scrap of land that still counts as New York, there sits a tremendous, abandoned building. Protected by its own isolated location, there is also at any given time 2 to 3 security guards there. However, if one approaches the cast iron gates on the night of December 4th, even those few security guards refuse to work. The gates are left unlocked, and the wind will be utterly still, a nearly opaque fog filling the peninsula. Go directly to the main doors and step within. There will be a single long hallway, the end occluded by that fog. If you look to either side upon entering, you will see a modern operating room through a glass door. The farther you walk, the older the equipment will get, the more old-fashioned the doctors will be dressed. As you can finally see the end of the hallway, the screams of the patients will be nearly deafening. The hall will terminate in an open door leading to a single wooden table. A man in woolen medical clothing, stained brown from blood, will be bent over a corpse. The body's face will be covered, and the man will turn silently, screwing the top onto a cloudy jar of liquid, filled to the brim. He will hand this abnormally heavy object to you, before turning back to his work. Instantly, you will be outside of those cast iron gates. From that point on, disease and injury will never affect you, but if you ever open that cloudy jar and pull out the contents, you will find a heart, pulsing and beating loudly in your palm. A sudden feeling of horror and revulsion will pass through you as realization strikes, that you have just pulled your own living heart from your chest.
I've got 2 stories for you. One happened a few months ago, and the other a few years ago. I'll start with the more recent one. I was spending a weekend with some friends at a house in upstate New York. The hostess had grown up there. Said that her family owned pretty much all the land for miles. Nearest neighbor was about 10 minutes by car. Most of it was forest, and a clearing where the house was. Fast forward to the first night, and after dinner, we split up into 2 groups. Some of us that wanted to go on a moonlight nature walk, and some of us that wanted to build a fire. The hostess said she'd rather stay with the fire group, to make sure that nothing gets too out of hand. She gave us a little lowdown of major landmarks in the forest, to make sure we don't get lost. And, off I went with the nature walk group. Sometime later, we're pretty deep in the forest, and we find a fallen tree. It fell in such a way that it was leaning on another Y-shaped tree, at an angle that was climbable for me, but no one else. Despite my friends warning me about hurting myself, I scampered up the tree. It was pretty high, probably a few feet below the top of the tree coverage. Looking around, I saw a small light in the distance, with what looked like flames licking over the tree line. I thought that maybe the other group had already lit the fire. Climbed down, mentioned it to my friends, and we moved on. We got back to the house, and the fire was not much more than a campfire, definitely not high enough to poke over the trees. I asked them about how it had gone down, but they said that it never was that high, that they only just lit it a few minutes ago. I was confused, and told the hostess about what I saw. She kinda laughed it off, but told me not to wonder about it. Was really out of character for her, and kind of threw me off. I tried to bring it up with her about a month later, but she said I shouldn't ask, and that it didn't matter. This one is from a few years ago. I was maybe 15 at the time. I grew up in a pretty nice suburban neighborhood, so I pretty much walked the whole thing regardless of the time of night. I was coming home from a friend's house around maybe 1 in the morning. This is a route that I had walked at least 100 times. I could do it with my eyes closed, so I knew I was going the right way. But, once I made the last turn onto what should have been my street, it looked unrecognizable, and almost off. I stood there and tried to make out the houses and cars, to see where I was, but the more I looked the more a sense of panic swelled in my stomach. Eventually, it got to be too much, and I freaked the fuck out. It's honestly hard for me to explain. I had never been that afraid in my life, and haven't been since. I ran without much regard for where, until I made a turn and noticed a familiar 7-Eleven. But, the light was off, and it looked like the store had been abandoned. I had seen the store open and clean earlier that day, so it only made my fear worse. I kept running, and eventually, ended up at a park a few miles from my house. An important note is that I definitely don't think that I had covered the necessary distance, or in the right direction, to end up at both of these places. Maybe I was just disoriented. I hid in the park's public bathroom until the sun came up, and my panic subsided. I called my parents, and asked them to pick me up. On the way back, I tried to explain to them what I had experienced, but they thought I had tried some kind of drug, and laughed it off.
I was 8 and lived in Brooklyn. All my family is in New York, not a fucking clue about camping or living in the woods. Uncle, who lives far upstate, invited me to stay with him for a week before Christmas. The family and parents wanted a week without my annoying ass running around, so Uncle picked me up from my brownstone and we drove up. It was still pretty bright out when we arrived, and it was just like the Christmas movies to me. I basically played in the snow for hours throwing snowballs, reenacted the Battle of Hoth with toys, made snowmen, beat the shit out of said snow and all that shit. Then it got dark, really fucking dark. I realized how quiet it was, to the point that the snow falling was audible, almost overwhelming. Then the trees got all eerie and shit. 2 trees stood apart, 2 thin pale smooth trees with no bark but little black holes with dark sap streaking down next to each other about 3 feet apart. Looked so different than the other normal brown trees and couldn't look more out of place. Knowing it was late, I head inside as my auntie calls me for dinner. Then I realize I left my Boba Fett in the shed. Boba Fett couldn't hold out the night, so I go in the shed. It had the usual shed stuff inside, except for the countless crosses and Christian symbols on the window. Why would a shed have a window? No fucking clue. You could see the 2 trees though the window. Find the Mandalorian in shed, walk out, shut shed and crack. A loud a sound echo behind me, fucking book it into the house, eat ravioli, go to bed. I wake up to the sun shining, go outside and something's off, the 2 trees are gone. The rest of the visit went well, but I know if it was my childlike imagination, because my older brain would came up with an explanation after 10 years, but I think those weren't trees.
Visiting my great-aunt Ellie for Thanksgiving as a kid. Huge house in upstate New York. Probably 150 years old. Completely filled with antique furniture, late 19th century stuff. Full-sized harp, giant music box, grand entrance with a curved staircase 2 stories high, grand piano in upstairs drawing room. Loved playing the piano and harp. Just screwing around playing wild stuff. House was full of weird places, like a dumb waiter in the walls, a tiny elevator the size of a locker, attic with wallpaper of old New Yorker magazine covers from the 1920s, old bear skin rug with bear head attached, basement carved out of the bedrock with these windowless empty stone rooms that went on and on, broken upright piano down there. Spent lots of time exploring, no TV and only an old Activision for video games. Slept in guest bedroom with sister in old 4-poster beds. This place was like right out of an old horror movie, always felt like someone was watching me. Coming up out of the basement, I would always run up the stairs like something was behind me. Basement door had a padlock on it for some reason. In guest room with sister falling asleep in these big beds. Hear grand piano down the hall, a couple notes plinking. Silence, sister is asleep, everyone is asleep. More single notes, sounds like Bach or something. Creeped out, pull up covers up to nose and listen. Nothing, then a loud bang like a door hitting the wall. Something very heavy being dragged to the large staircase. Huge tumbling crash, sound of breaking wood and piano strings like someone slammed a 2x4 onto piano keys down the staircase outside the guest room. Sister is awake, everyone is awake now. Sounded like someone just pushed the piano down 2 flights of stairs to the hall below. Everyone in the hallway in shock from the noise. No piano, at the bottom of the staircase. Piano still in drawing room. That was just one of the weird experiences we had at my great-aunt's house. Had great memories too though.
B10. Be living with my grandparents in Upper New York. Weird cultists living about 3 houses down, in this neighborhood that's like 2 miles. Be getting late, around 10 at night. Grandparents live in a woodland area of about 12 acres, 1 acre cut grass, 11 untamed wilderness. Be walking a hound dog outside. Walking for a good hour in grass, before it decides it wants to go in the woods. My face when. Walk into woods, go about 3 to 4 acres deep. Pitch black, has nothing but a battery metal flashlight. Scared shitless. Fallen tree from tornado some 50 years ago nearby, root system perfectly vertical, shit looked like a hellish wall of vines. Getting into a crisis now. Pulls the dog back towards the cut grass, big mistake. Standing in front of me is some 7 to 8 foot tall figure, black cloak, not baggy but not tight, sort of loose fit, face perfectly symmetrical, no mouth, black eyes with shaking plus sign pupils, face almost perfectly snow white, no noticeable imperfections other than stretch marks where mouth should be. Scared out of my mind, frozen in place. Thing looking right down at me, weird necklace dangling from neck, not gold or bronze, more like copper. Backs away slowly, keeping eye contact, literally pissed myself. Dog just as scared and frozen as me, has to pull it back by leash until it's close enough to pick up. Backs away until I'm touching soft grass, thing still fucking looking at me. Hurries back to the house and changes clothes. Crying my damn eyes out, feeling like I just saw the Reaper. Someone tell me what the hell I saw. I've only told my 2 closest friends about this, no one else fucking believes me.
Black-eyed waitress first. I just want to say that I have never been a believer in the supernatural, paranormal, etc. I think that everything has a logical explanation that maybe only seems bizarre, because of a certain kind of overexcitement that many people have about an experience from the other side, or what have you. There is absolutely no explanation for what I'm about to share with you, and it absolutely scares the crap out of me. Just recounting this is giving me a really creepy feeling that I don't think I'll be able to shake, maybe ever. About 3 years ago, I was sitting in a local coffee shop in upstate New York during a little road trip. The restaurant was empty except for me and the night waitress. She was really pleasant and talked a lot. She was offering places to check out while I was in town and seemed amazingly astute. In fact, she seemed almost prescient, even guessing my age almost to the day and month, and even certain things that I was actually planning to do the next day. It was so lighthearted, I thought I really lucked out by meeting an easygoing, smart young lady quite out my normal way. At closing time, she went to the back to, I guess, put some cash in the safe or something. As I was sitting there wondering what time I wanted to get up and hit the road again the next day, I momentarily thought I might even invite her for a few hours of R&R. I decided instead to just remember the store, and next time I passed through the area, to remember to stick my head in and say, "Hi." No reason. I just wanted to play it cool and not seem overanxious at very first. So, I got up and knocked on the door in the back of the coffee shop where she went in. At this time, there were only 2 dim lights in the main eating area, and barely any lights in the back room where she was. I opened the door. This woman who I just finished talking to was standing facing me, just standing there in the back of this dark room when I opened the door. Her skin was suddenly a clammy, cracked olive color, and her eyes were just black. I mean, no white at all. Her eyes and mouth was open really wide, and she was screaming in the most spine-chilling sounds, something I couldn't understand, but it definitely wasn't sounds of goodwill. I literally screamed myself, and she started moving from one spot to the other through the room. Not running, just moving. Her clothes now looked all old, and she moved so fast. The back of the room must have been 15 feet or so back, and she just darted from one side of the back of the room, still facing me, to the other side, at an impossible speed. Then she ran directly straight at me as I was now standing away from the door in the middle of the restaurant. I got the hell out of there, and jumped in my car, still seeing her nightmarish face in the restaurant, darting it seemed to every window at this impossible velocity. The worst thing was, as I tore out of the parking lot, I looked in my rear-view mirror, and she was sitting in the back seat, still with that nightmarish expression, still screaming. Then she just vanished as I was panicking around. Just gone. I don't know what that was that spoke to me in the restaurant that day, but I know that it wasn't a prank. I swear at night sometimes I see her shadow moving in the dark in my room, just grinning a really ugly, evil grin. I haven't slept properly since.
Be 10 to 13, I forget the exact age. Live in upstate New York, near Watertown, Fort Drum area. Weird fucking place BTW, rampant crime, cults, literally thousands of spiders living in the grass outside our house, even in the winter, would make these gigantic rolling webs in the grass, could see them running with the naked eye. What the fuck did they even eat? Late at night you could hear the weirdest noises coming from the direction of the military base. My dad and I would stand outside sometimes and just listen. Sounded like dropping a basketball and just letting it dribble itself down, except huge, we lived something like 25 to 50 miles away. Happened over and over again at all hours of the night, as well as blinking lights. Locals acted like they had no idea what we were talking about. Like a Stephen King novel town, no lie. One night as I'm lying in bed, upstairs, I'm just kind of zoned out, but not really tired. Really relaxed. It was a good day, don't remember what happened, but I think my dad was home, from working out of town. As I'm looking up toward the ceiling, what I can only describe as a window, like from early Windows 95 or more actually, like the windows from the CG reboot show, although I had never seen the show before then. It's showing me planets and things I've never seen before. It's like I'm flying through space, like I'm in it. I'm watching it, but I'm there in the massive void, and it's also like I'm being talked to, although I can't hear words or language or even know it, but I know I'm receiving something. This feeling is overwhelming, and then it becomes terrifying in an instant, and I start screaming at the top of my lungs, and the window closes, and I'm still screaming. When my parents come in, I can't explain it. I've never told anyone about it. The memory is so vivid even to this day. I can see everything that was in my room, how the house looked, etc. What I saw in the vision is very blurry though, only bits and pieces. The worst part is, it was interrupted, and I'm not sure if it's because I'm just upset that I didn't get to finish what they were showing. I am still upset I couldn't keep myself calm and see everything. I also know that they were disappointed in me, that either I wasn't ready, or I just wasn't able to deal with it at all. I wasn't right for it. It was such a weird feeling, because I got so terrified when it was happening, because I remember looking side to side, moving my head, and establishing that I'm not dreaming, this is really happening, I'm not in a trance or something, this thing is hovering above my face and I'm looking into it.
Not a long one, but a weird experience I had while in a field event in New York. Week-long field event somewhere near Fort Drum, not really sure where, slept on the bus ride out there. Second night out, it's cold AF, and for some reason my lieutenant decided a rocky hill would be the perfect place for a patrol base. My turn on watch, freezing my ass off and very awkwardly wedged on a large boulder. Scanning the woods with my NVGs, which were constantly going in and out because the battery was dying. Hear very loud crunch of sticks and leaves maybe 20 meters out. Turn on the floodlight on my nods. Can kinda see some really wiry, pale dude, average height, normal posture. No clothes. It's like 15 degrees out, so I was gonna call out to him and ask if he was okay. Start to get on a knee, but he hears me and absolutely bolts in the opposite direction. Like light fucking speed through extremely rocky and uneven terrain. Sit there nervous as fuck for the duration of my watch. Wake up my buddy and go to sleep. Never saw anything like that for the rest of event.
I've sat on this one for about 15 years now. Be me, about 14 years old. Live on property with 120 acres of woodland. In these woods, there's a section of forest composed of nothing but ash trees. Older relatives jokingly refer to it as the haunted woods. One summer my dad decides he wants 200 ash trees cut down for dock posts. We lived near Lake Chautauqua in New York. I'm given a rusty handsaw and a sturdy rope for dragging the trees back to the house one at a time. So what should have been a weekend of hard work turns into the entire fucking summer spent in those woods. Don't see what the big deal is at first. After a week or so, teenage hormones kick in and I stop cutting trees and just start fucking around. Notice almost immediately that despite all the regular sounds of nature being present, I could never seem to pinpoint any actual movement. I would hear sounds of movement, trace them to where the sound came from and nothing. I'm not clueless about tracking, and anywhere else I would be able to spot the critter or at least some obvious sign, but not here. This puts a damper on my fun and I get back to work. Grow increasingly skittish and paranoid as the weeks go on. Sometimes I'll hear the sound of dry leaves being pushed around by animals about the size of a raccoon. Sometimes I'll look right at the place where the noise is coming from, but see no movement at all. No big climax or anything, but years later at a family gathering one of my uncles mentioned how it's pointless to track deer through the haunted woods. I perked up and asked him, but he just grinned and told me that I probably understood better than anyone else in the family, having spent so much time there myself.
The Buffalo Psychiatric Center for the majority of the 20th century, America's mentally ill were institutionalized in asylums built according to the Kirkbride Plan. At its inception, this system of treatment was thought of as revolutionary. Previously, mentally ill members of society were imprisoned, or locked away in their homes and cared for by their families. So the idea of hospitalization as opposed to outright imprisonment for the mentally ill was seen as absolutely humanitarian. But very quickly into the history of the Kirkbride Plan, things took a turn for the worst. Hospitals became overcrowded, resources became scarce, and patient abuses became increasingly more frequent. Mental hospitals went from being considered refuges of compassion and hope to dark places of despair and torment. One such place was the Buffalo Psychiatric Center in Buffalo, New York. Here the abuses were even more severe than at most hospitals. And the remains of this cursed place still stand as a reminder of how terribly things went wrong. The facility built in Buffalo was unique even among Kirkbride hospitals. Instead of being located in a rural area, it was located only a few miles from downtown Buffalo. When the hospital opened in 1871, it was filled to its 300-person capacity. By the 1930s, things had gone horribly wrong. The hospital was home to over 3,000 patients. There was simply no time to treat every patient properly, and no room to adequately house them. Patients were left to sleep on top of each other in filthy, dank hallways. Some were even forced to sleep outdoors in cold Buffalo winters. By the middle of the century, new drugs were being developed to treat mental illness. The asylum system was becoming obsolete. This, coupled with the inadequacy of the hospital facilities and the patient abuses that happened time and time again, led to the hospital's closure in the early 1970s. It still stands today, a testament to a great idea from an earlier time gone awry. Not surprisingly, rumors abound that the castle-like structure is haunted by the ghosts of former patients who died there. They are said to roam the grounds frequently, and love most of all the tunnels that lay beneath the buildings, connecting them.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.